Are you revealing things like your career plans that end up ruining your chances of getting the job? I've interviewed over 1,000 people and I'm generally quite forgiving about this, but I've noticed many others aren't. There are some good and some very naughty reasons for that. And once you've revealed something, you can't really take it back. So if it sinks your chance of getting the job, well, by the time you've said it, it's too late. And what's worse is you're probably making at least one of those mistakes without realizing it. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 things that people reveal in job interviews that they really shouldn't. Things like what you're good at or how your previous workplace was, which seems safe but often aren't. And as a bonus, I'll also share a tip that will massively reduce the impact of revealing the wrong thing, in case you still end up doing it unintentionally. Now, before diving into the details of what not to say, we need to understand why there are things you shouldn't say. Even just that will give you an edge. And for this, I'm going to need these Bluetooth speakers. Now, if I asked you to make a choice between these 5 speakers and you really cared about picking the right one, you'd probably want to know as much as possible about each of them. You'd ask all the questions and you'd really want to make sure you know all the details, so you know the pros and cons before you make a choice. On the other hand, if I asked you to make a choice between 100 Bluetooth speakers, you would go about it very differently. Most likely, first you would be looking for ways to cut that number down to something more manageable. Well, it's the same with hiring. When you're dealing with large numbers of candidates, you don't really have the capacity to go into a lot of detail with each of them. Instead of finding out everything you can about each candidate, you end up looking for reasons to turn away as many candidates as possible to get back to a number that's not so overwhelming. In practice, this can end up turning away great candidates. So I don't like this very much personally, but that's just how humans function. And to be honest, when I had hundreds of applications to go through, I basically did the same thing. So if you're one amongst 100 Bluetooth speakers, you do still want to stand out, but you really want to make sure you don't do so in a way that gives the interviewer a reason to cut you out of the process. Because they will if you give them any reason at all. They're desperate to get those numbers down. Now, later on in the interview process, when you are one amongst just a few final candidates, then you can relax a little bit, and you probably should to build trust. But in the early stages, you have to be much more careful. So let's get into the practical details of what not to reveal. But don't forget that later on, I'll provide a tip that can make any mistake you stumble into much less harmful. Let's start with one that almost everyone does without even thinking about it, even though it often nixes their chances of making it to the next round. So going back to the Bluetooth speakers, imagine you've got to filter down for 100. And right now you're looking at just 2 of them. And one just says, this 50-watt speaker can last for 20 hours and weighs only 150 grams. And the other one that looks almost the same says, this 50-watt speaker can last 20 hours and weighs only 150 grams. And it's waterproof, so you can use it by the pool when it rains or even in the shower. Now, it might sound like the second one is better, but if you're looking for a Bluetooth speaker to put by your bed and you have 98 other speakers to look at, chances are you're gonna drop the second one because it has a feature you don't care about, you don't want to pay for it. Earlier in the process, the interviewer is looking for any reason to say no and to cut the numbers down. So the first thing you should not reveal is, well, anything that's not relevant to what they're looking for, even if you think it's a plus, like more credentials or a bunch of extra skills. So that can include anything from personal information, health matters, disabilities, unless they're directly relevant to the job, age, personal financial information, and of course, religious or political beliefs. Really, even if you think they're a positive, if they're not relevant, they can become a reason to eliminate you. So just keep things concise. Figure out what the interviewer is looking for, and if it's something that you can offer, reveal that. And then stop and let them ask the next question. Now, there is a kind of information that is directly relevant to the job you're applying for that you also shouldn't reveal though. Imagine you're a recruiter at Google and you interview somebody coming from Facebook, and it starts telling you all sorts of interesting confidential information about Facebook's ads program that Google might be able to use to get an edge. Well, when you share that sort of confidential information, you might think your new employer will like it, but really what you're telling them is that you probably also won't keep their information confidential when you leave them. That really won't win you any points. Plus, there's a fair chance the recruiter will get uncomfortable that you even think that they would actually use this information, even though it's acquired unethically. Double fail. In smaller industries, it also sometimes happens that companies will fake interview people from competitors, specifically to gather competitive information. I've seen it happen. So if the interviewer doesn't get uncomfortable, but instead is really interested in all this confidential information, especially at an early stage in the process, and if they actively ask you questions about it, Well, I'll leave you to decide whether to answer, but you can be nearly certain that this company won't be hiring you anytime soon. Next, let's uncover 3 more things you might reveal, which many people think will boost their chances, but which will actually sink you. There's this old story of a wise man traveling from one city to another. In the middle, he meets another traveler and they camp together that night. Since they are going to each other's cities, the traveler asks, "How are the people in your city?" The wise man answers, "First, tell me how were the people in the city you came from?" And the traveler spits on the ground and says, "They were vile, mean, vicious. They were out to get me." The wise man nods, pauses, and says, "Well, my friends, they will be the same in the city you're going to." When you get asked about your previous employers or co-workers, how you go about answering that can tell the interviewer a lot about you. See, few people realize this, but mostly when we talk about other people, we are really talking about ourselves and how we see the world. So when you talk about a previous coworker who was evil and out to get you, what you're really saying is that you were in a conflict and you didn't know how to resolve it, so you blamed the other person. Or if you say your boss was micromanaging you, what you're really saying is that either you needed to be micromanaged and so your boss took that on, or that you didn't figure out how to just have a conversation with your boss about it and find a better way to work together. Either way, that's on you, not them. Instead, even if you did have a lousy boss or coworker, try finding some positives to talk about. And it's okay to mention challenges, but when you do, talk about what you learned and how you found ways to work with the situation. And be clear that you contributed to the difficulties too, rather than blaming it all on the other person. Now, there's one point that I find especially controversial. See, very often people hire when they want a specific job done. Usually they want it done yesterday. And so very often you're going to be asked where you see yourself in 5 or 10 years, and that can be a bit of a trap. See, annoyingly, a lot of companies will actually filter you out of the process if you seem too ambitious. They'll hear your dreams and think you're not all that passionate about the specific narrow job that they want to hire you for. This seems really silly to me. Smart, ambitious people want to grow and develop. So very often they don't want to be in the same job for 5 years. But if you do share your dreams and they're not immediately relevant to that really narrow job, that can also end up losing you the job, at least in some companies. One solution to this is to sort of half avoid the question. Basically, don't give a specific 5-year vision, but just sidestep it and reiterate your commitment to the work. For a TikTok marketing job, you might say something like, "So where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years?" Well, it's hard to look that far ahead given how fast things are changing. But at this point, what I really want to do is to double down on my social media marketing skills. I want to really get to the point where I'm world-class at TikTok marketing. If you somehow do accidentally share something a bit more out there, be sure to immediately reiterate how committed you are to doing the job the company is hiring you for, so they don't think you're a flight risk. Very soon I'll mention a final tip that can minimize the impact if you do share something you shouldn't have. But first, there's one last important thing you shouldn't do in an interview. Now, it's normal to be nervous, and a lot of people react to that by just talking on and on and on, as if more words and more words and more words and more words and more words is what's going to convince the other person. When you're asked something, answer it. Be friendly and engaged. And when you've answered it, stop. There's power in this silence, isn't there? So long as you maintain friendly, relaxed eye contact, silence projects confidence and calm, which can make the interviewer trust you more. Can you remember a time when you kept talking when you shouldn't have? Please mention it in the comments. If you're really nervous, by the way, things like deep breathing or even making yourself smile and arriving early to take in the location and relax can really help with nerves. And now, for the final tip. I interviewed over 1,000 people when I ran my business, and I found that 96% of them tended to fail this right out of the gate, before they even sat down. With 33% of recruiters openly admitting they make their hiring decisions within the first 90 seconds after meeting a candidate, this is absolutely crucial to get right. I've seen firsthand how mastering the art of introducing yourself can make a huge difference to your interviews, and I want that for you. So check out this video to find out how to introduce yourself in an interview setting and boost your chances of getting hired. I hope you find joy and meaning at work, as everyone deserves to.